Chapter 4 Fathers and Kings. Haille leapt upwards and slapped the outstretched arm of a statue in the garden on his way to the east wing where the younger children practiced fencing. A bird flew off the crest of Reed Hall, and for a moment he thought it may have been one of his jays. However, it flew off in the opposite direction. Just an ordinary robin. The day seemed full of promise once more. He could already hear Master Ivan calling on the boys in his own class to run wind sprints. He smiled, kicking the mud from his shoes in the entryway of the next hall over, and pushed open the paneled door on a room full of boys dwarfed by their own practice blades. An hour of helping the youngsters work on their footing, their blocks, and their thrusts took Haille's mind off the day's previous grief. Only in moments when the boys broke for water did he still see the wolf in his mind's eye. He shut it away and instead savored the continuing pounding of feet in the next hall over as Ivan drilled his classmates. The younger students took well to his lessons. After time on the basics, he focused them on a few more advanced movements and then let them spar freestyle, praising them for attempting the techniques they had just learned, despite their mistakes. He liked the youngsters. They were obedient and respectful, more afraid of him because he was a prince than because of his affliction. Not a single one recoiled at his touch when he helped them position their arms for a block. No one whispered "invalid" behind his back. Most didn't even know of his affliction, and when one asked him about the leather pallet around his neck, indented with half-moon marks of his own teeth, he dismissed it as something he was required to wear, and no further questions followed. They were more interested in learning a sliding down block from him. To them, I am nearly normal. When the class was over, he was grateful he did not need to change in the dressing room. He watched with no small amount of satisfaction as his classmates trudged off to remove their pads. Bent at the waist, their swords drooping, their clothes soaked through with sweat. Eager to avoid them altogether, he ran back to Academy House to get his satchel. There was still light enough left in the day that he could go to the forest and feed the jays. He still had a pouch of breadcrumbs from the kitchen stuffed in his satchel from that morning. But he stopped in the doorway when he entered the lecture hall. The room was familiar to him. So was Madame Havisham, the benches, and the desks. After all, he saw this same scene every day of the week for moons on end. But seeing Yana sail, the fixture of his home life, amid the people and things of his academy life, was wrong. She wore a lavender surcoat cinched with a man's belt over riding pants and boots. Her red hair fell in graceful flowing curls to rest on her hood. Normally, on any other occasion, he would have been happy to see her. But not now when she wore such an expression of disappointment, her lips a flat line of barely contained anger. "Behavior not befitting his station," Madame Havisham said in a caustic, nasal tone. Yana glared at him across the room. "Certainly not," she said. She stood, smoothing the folds of her surcoat over the place where her sword usually hung. Her steps were light, like a dancer, her gait swift and sweeping, as if she were eager to quit the room, the company of Haille's instructor, and even Haille himself. Still, she paused before the doorway and turned back to Madame Havisham. "Thank you, madam. I assure you I will attend to him." Haille raked his lower lip with his teeth. Attending to him took the form of stepping past him in the doorway without as much as a glance. Haille knew better than not to follow. He snatched his satchel from the back of his chair and ran into the corridor. Yana was already descending the stairs to the main courtyard. He was glad that most of the students had been dismissed for the day. It was embarrassing when one's minders had to be called in. Yana's horse, Grey Wind, was waiting for her. She didn't mount but led the mare by the reins out of the gate at a quick clip. Haille continued in their wake, his hand twisting the strap of his satchel. As they passed Beecham Avenue and the path leading to the forest, he ventured to say, "I thought perhaps we would feed the jays today." Yana turned on him. She slapped his face. "You know better!" His skin burned everywhere. His cheek stung. It was a pain that reached deep within him, for disappointing Yana was punishment in itself. "I'm sorry. An orphan. Caitlin, whatever her name is. I thought she was someone else. You are the one saying I have to stick up for myself. That is what a man does. A man protects those that are weaker than he. You are mistaken if that is the only lesson of manhood you have taken from me. Be strong, don't be weak. Be strong to be kind. Man is not measured by his brawn only, but how he can love and be loved by others. Look at your father. Haille snorted, his own temper flaring with a dizzy rush to his head. For all the love he shows me. Yana winced. All she could muster was, Your father is loved by the people. Haille had a ready retort for her again. And we know that love does not extend to me. I'm tired of having to stand up for myself, for being the object of their scorn, their resentment. Her throat flared. He could see her resistance breaking down. For as much as Yana was angry at him, he knew her love for him was greater. No one understood his plight better. But if she was going to relent now, she showed no further signs. Haille, I won't stand here and listen to you quip about being a victim. You must be better than that. She turned her back on him and led Grey Wind away in the direction of the castle gate, her shoed hooves clopping on the cobblestones. A wagon passed between them. Haille realized he had, without thinking, reached into his bag and wrapped his hand around the pouch of breadcrumbs he had hoped to share with the blue jays. He yanked it free of the satchel and flung it in a fluid motion into the side of the wagon. It burst, sending a rain of crumbs onto the cobblestones below. He went to his room after that, and he realized the jays were not ready to let him off so easy. The three of them were waiting on his windowsill, chirping behind the glass panes, three bobbing masses of feathers. He unlatched the window and swung it open. Cyan, the boy of the trio, swooped in and alighted on the bedpost. Sapphire waited on the sill, preening her feathers, while Azure leapt to Haille's fingers and perched there. I'm sorry, friends, but I threw away the breadcrumbs I had saved for you. Blame my temper. Azure reproached him with a sharp chirp. Sapphire was aloof. It never ceased to amaze him how much she lived into her namesake. The only jay he had named for a jewel, she was haughty and vain, constantly preening her feathers. However, being a female, her plumage could not equal that of her brother, Cyan, who was indifferent to his own appearance. He was as foolhardy and as adventurous as any little brother with two sisters to look after him might be. Even now he was bouncing along the floor next to the door, searching for crumbs. You better be careful, Cyan. If a guard sees you, he is likely to snare you for dinner, Haille said as Azure hopped onto his shoulder. She, the big sister of the trio, or so Haille imagined. In keeping with her responsible role, she fluttered away from Haille to dive at her brother and herd him back to the safety of the window. Not to be left out, Sapphire took up a place on Haille's knee as he sat down on the sill. He looked past all three of them to Worthern Forest, where they lived, his eyes roving north over the spear-shaped trees and to the ridges lifting into a sky the color of steel. The sun, low in its afternoon track, was a milky disk to the west. It would not be long, though, before it broke beneath the lowest clouds to tint the earth with the tea-colored light of evening before dropping below the horizon completely. He looked the length of the castle wall and noticed the window to his father's chamber swing open. He would have thought it a cleaner, but no one raised a hand with a rag to wipe it. It must have been his father who had opened it. Best to get it over with sooner rather than later, he thought, releasing the jays to soar out over the battlements back to the woods. What a strange sight he must have been, sitting in the window daily with the jays, in full view of the guards, the castle nobility, cleaners, servants, cooks, and their like. High or low-born, he could imagine what they thought of him. The invalid prince. The cursed child. He was willing to bet that many who had seen him there in his window had wished for him to fall to his death. What they didn't realize were all the times he had thought of jumping. A darkness settled over his heart. A curtain pulled against the sun and a familiar sadness set in. He was about to see his father. The guards at either side of the door made efficient nods as Haille approached his father's chambers. He mumbled a "good eve" to them, never quite comfortable with the obligatory deference the castle vassals showed him. He'd done nothing to earn it except be born, and he knew from spying on their conversations how they mocked him for his sickness and blamed him for his mother's death. He was surprised to hear Yana's voice from beyond the door. Apparently she had already decided to turn him into his father. but after a few moments he realized he had assumed wrong, for her tone was more of pleading than of scolding. "He is shunned," she said. "Every child of privileges. I was until I could earn the respect of my fellow classmates. It's a rite of passage." "He is not shunned for privilege, but for his affliction." "There is nothing to be done about that." Haille heard his father settling into his chair, the joints creaking. Although he could not see him, Haille could picture him perfectly. Countless times he had sat across from the king, the round table of his study between them. Yana had known Talimar all his life. She had also known Haille's mother. After Airsole's death, Haille's father had invited Yana to join the Council of Elders not only because her own municipality, Rivertown, had grown and merited representation, but he valued someone who knew him and would speak truth to power. Yana had never disappointed. "But he is still blamed for his mother's death." The room was stifled by silence. No one spoke to his father of his mother. Talimar was quick to demonstrate why. "I have asked you not to bring that tragedy up." Yana was not cowed. "Isn't it time you moved past her death?" "And the people won't forgive me. So popular she was. I still see some old women wearing black cowls for her." "They don't blame you, but your son," she repeated. "Each day he bears that burden. Your own continued mourning does not alleviate the situation. Your mourning robes cast a shadow over not just you, but your son as well." Silence hung in the room for a long while before his father said in a voice thick with emotion, "Have I been dwelling on my grief so long?" Haille, sensing his father's vulnerability, dismissed the guards with a flick of his wrist. They obeyed, moving to stand at either end of the hallway. Haille continued to listen. "How is it for him?" his father asked. "Difficult, my liege," she said. "How do you think it would be for any child who had to wear a pallet around his neck? The other children ridicule him. Adults ridicule him. He has become ardent to survive it. He's disrespectful and intractable with his teachers, and he's picking fights with the other children now in an effort to preempt others. I don't want him turning into a bully." "He couldn't be one with his size. He takes after his mother's diminutive nature." "I've made sure he can defend himself." She had, Haille reflected. It was Yana's additional lessons on fighting, with weapons or without, that had placed him ahead of his peers in at least his fencing classes. The skills had served him well, but the thought reminded him of just why Yana was so angry with him in the first place. "Strength's purpose is to be used to protect and prepare. A man's worth is judged by how much he loves and is loved." It was one of the axioms she had made him repeat as he had drilled his thrusts, sweeps, and blocks in the forest clearing where they practiced in secret. He did know better. "But Yana, if I were to believe you in all things, you would have convinced me half the kingdom is treasonous." "Not treasonous, but untrustworthy. You will always be surrounded by politics." "But conspiracies involving Annabeth Chastain? She is a loyal supporter." "She is loyal to herself." "Some might say you are threatened by her desire to join the council." "Your problem, my liege, is that you are too virtuous. When you always tell the truth, it is harder to see the lies of others. The people love you for it, but it will be someone closer to you who slips the knife into your back." "Politics are a distraction, especially when my son—" "Airsole's son too." "I know that." "Then honor him as you honor her. She would want a better life for him, a better father." Haille heard his father inhale. He could picture him, his jaw working, his brow furrowed, his hand rubbing across the whiskers on his cheeks. "Need I remind you of your place, Lady Yana?" His father was retreating into the shell of his authority, his second favorite defense after his own self-pity. But Yana was not one to placate him. "My liege, I can forgive you for being blind to your enemies, but I plead you not to be blind to those who love you." His father did not respond as Yana stood up, her own chair scraping across the floor. "I'll leave you to your thoughts." "That would be best." Haille, hearing her turn to the doorway, darted across the hall to the library where he hid behind the open door until Yana's footsteps receded around the corner. When he emerged, his father's door banged shut, the lock clipping into place.